Welcome to another episode of Start, Grow and Monetise Your Podcast with me, Alex Chisnall, and my good friend and co-host and podcaster and podcast agency owner and podcast consultant and podcast coach, James Burtt.
Done a lot of stuff in podcasting, it turns out, guys.
It does, and we're going to be talking about podcast frequency, and by that I mean how often should you release your podcast? Should that be weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, twice weekly, thrice weekly?
Thrice weekly, you're saying?
Yes.
The Victorian reference that we made in a previous episode. Thrice weekly, Governor. This is really important, guys, because it sounds really, really simple, but actually the consistency with which you put the content out has a big impact on it.
Yeah.
I always say to clients, I don't know if you say the same thing, but if they can't commit to doing a podcast, no, I'd never say the same thing as you to clients. That's why I've got more of them. Sod you, Chisnall. But one of the things that they always ask, or one of the things I say is if you can't commit to doing a podcast at least fortnightly, don't start.
Oh, fortnightly. I thought you were going to say weekly.
Absolute minimum is fortnightly.
I was going to say, yes, okay.
Best practice is weekly. And really, if you want the best results, you should be putting out weekly. In my humble opinion.
Yeah, so, okay, my take on this, and this is from somebody who went from weekly to twice weekly and back to weekly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, keeping it concise, I only went to twice weekly because all of my guests had cancelled and I had nothing in the pipeline to put out as an episode. And I was like, I've been podcasting for, 9 months every single week. And I was like, I've got to put something out. What shall I do? I know I'm going to record an episode of the best bits of the previous 9 month guests.
Oh, I've done that one, yeah.
So what are the commonalities? What are the commonalities of those that makes all of these guests that I've had super successful in what they do? So I did that episode, and then surprisingly in my mind's eye, which again is another reason to, don't doubt yourself. Just start now, get perfect later. But amazingly, it was one of the most popular episodes that I'd ever done.
See that, yeah.
And it's still in the top 10 of 560 episodes later,
Really?
most popular episodes. And that encouraged me to do another solo episode and then another and another. So before I knew it, I was doing a solo episode every week and an interview episode every week. And then I literally came to it's something like 4 years later, and I just found I was repeating myself. And this is bearing in mind this is a solo podcast, and I'm just talking, about my experience as an entrepreneur, as a podcaster, as an agency owner, all of these things. And it's like, I think I've said all that I need to say in 200 odd episodes. I've got nothing else left to give type thing, So now I say with clients, I'm like, you can go down two routes here. I think you can either commit, as you say, to a weekly show, because quite often they come in on, I think I'm going to do a monthly show. Do you think that's enough?
Yeah.
And I say no. Like you, I said I think it needs to be a minimum of every other week, but ideally a week. But if you can't commit to a week, which again I totally understand, then why don't you look at a series? And a series for me can be 6, 8, 10, 12 episodes long. And again, for all of these options, and in an ideal world, I will also say, if you're going to commit to a series, you should do 4 seasons in a year. And again, they can be 6, 8, 10, 12 episodes. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, make it flow naturally. But with all of these choices, just be consistent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever you choose to do, just be consistent with it. If it's going to be weekly, put it out every week. If it's twice weekly, put it out twice a week. Don't do, as one of my clients is still doing, let's do 3 in November, let's do none in December, let's do 6 in January, let's miss February.
Yeah.
And then come back to me and go, so why are the downloads not reaching my expectations?
Because no one knows when the podcast is coming out.
And that's exactly it. Run with that.
Yeah, people are real creatures of habit, so that they will know that on a certain day of the week, this show comes out. If you're consuming this show, okay, great, it's Monday, that show's coming out again. Brilliant. There'll be other favourite shows. I remember when, what was the first one that I ever got obsessed with? It was a podcast about podcasting. Did you ever listen to it?
No.
Oh, it was a guy. I'll have to find out. It was amazing. But it's about a guy.
Not a podcast about podcasting.
It's a podcast about podcasting. But
It's been done before.
It was him talking about launching his agency, but he had used to work at NPR. And then he launched a network.
Not Guy Raz.
No, it's the other fella. Ira Glass, was it?
Close.
This American Life. I'll have to find out for you. But anyway, I knew on a Thursday that show came out, and I was so excited. Like every Thursday morning, I would be up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym. I was like, that's the thing that I'm listening to. So people will get really, really consistent with it. The reason why the consistency piece is really important, and the weekly/bi-weekly thing, is that here's how your downloads are going to work. And it doesn't matter how big your show is, it's roughly going to follow the same structure. The day your podcast comes out, not just the launch day, but the day of the week where you put your podcast out, you will get your maximum downloads. And then it drops off every day thereafter by 50%. And we've seen this with shows that are doing 150,000 downloads a month and shows that are doing 150 downloads a month. That pattern of 100%, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50 every day thereafter works again and again. So it doesn't matter how big your numbers are. Let's say you get 1,000 on the day that you launch the episode, you get 500 the next day, 250 the next day, 125, 67 and a half, 33 and a bit. So by the time you get to the end of that week, you're down to pretty much 0 downloads again. Now that's fine, because then if you go with the next episode, then again you pop up in the podcast feed. If somebody goes onto their podcast feed on that particular day of the week, you're back up the top of their browse feed. They're likely to listen to it again. Depends on their notification settings. They might even get notified that a new episode's gone live. That is such an underrated thing with podcasts as well. The fact you can notify your ideal listeners every time a new episode goes out is madness. What would you have to pay to get on somebody's mobile device if you're doing paid ads? Like an absolute fortune. But if you don't do that, by the time that you get down to like a fortnightly basis, there's been, another 14 days worth of shows, and then you're potentially just going to struggle to get to the top of their feed. And you've also got so much other competition. Like if I went onto my phone now, I don't know where my phone is. Where's my phone actually? Remember I left it at the restaurant. Unfortunately, my phone that just got stolen at a restaurant. But if I look shows from yesterday, there's probably like another 10 shows from today that have gone above it. So I might just forget about a show. And I do this. I don't know if you do. I forget about a show that I love. And then I'm like, oh my God, I haven't listened to that for months actually. Because it just hasn't come up far enough in my feed. Now, the counter position to that is I get clients very similar to you. They either go, I'm going to do monthly or I'm going to do 3 a week. I'm just like, no. So I would say, and I would give this as advice for people, if you're a new podcaster, do not commit to more than once a week to start with.
Oh, massively.
Because this is a huge undertaking when you get it up and running.
Yeah.
Moving forward, if you're going to do a simple podcast, maybe you're going to do audio only. Maybe you don't want the faff of the videos. Maybe you intentionally just want the audio. Maybe you're doing, I don't know, like small, short meditations or whatever, and it doesn't require or doesn't need the video requirement to promote it. Fine, it is what it is. So if you're doing that, that's going to be relatively simple to produce that quite quickly. But for everything else, especially if you're using video, especially if you're making assets, which you definitely need to be doing, if you're making trailers and clips and TikToks and you're making graphics and you're doing thumbnails and you're doing the promo for it and you're doing show notes and maybe you're repurposing it as a blog, it's quite an undertaking. So don't overcommit to it, because again, unfortunately, what you give people to start with will become their sort of baseline expectation. Yeah. You can easily start once a week. If you get the grass shoots of something that's really successful, 100% up it to twice a week and see if you have a greater impact. I've got a show that I do called Business Broadcast. We do it twice a week. It is a massive undertaking though, because it is a 3-camera shoot. We have to go somewhere to go and record it all.
Especially if someone loses an SD card and loses a whole day's recording, if that ever happened.
Oh my God, not my fault, by the way, not my fault. The way to, and the final bit on this, sort of on the bullet points that we had about the sort of the picking the right date, do you go weekly, bi-weekly or monthly? The final part, and I think this comes into really nicely to your mention of the series, is that the way to get around content burnout is to batch record stuff. So for example, Alex mentioned you could do a series and the season could be 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, don't know why, round numbers for whatever reason, seems to work best. But let's say, for example, you're going to do 10 episodes. You could get all 10 of those episodes done and dusted before you even start putting the content out. So even if you've batch recorded it as
just
a
like
season,
us, James.
Just like us.
Whoa.
Unbelievable.
Walk in the talk.
But for example, if you've got the 10 episodes ready to go then you can easily do it on a weekly basis because you've got that time.
You bought yourself time.
You bought yourself your time back, and that's a much better way of doing it. I would say personally, you're better to do a 10-episode season, have a 6-week break, go another 10-episode season, have a 6-week break, and put it out on a weekly basis than you would if you could eke out fortnightly over the space of a year. I think you'll get more results for it personally.
I'll add in a couple of things there. I would say, again, what I would recommend personally is that if you're going to go down the series route, and that's a great place to start without going, full on commitment from the get-go of committing to a weekly show, but buying yourself that time, is that the less time you leave in between each series, the more chance you have of the community that you've built being there, coming back. So there are some natural breaks in the calendar when podcast downloads dip. Agreed?
Yes.
So typically, middle of December onwards through to New Year, Easter, August. So if you're looking to take a break from your podcast, I would recommend kind of those 3 moments that you could do it. But, very much people are creatures of habit, as you say. So if you put your podcast out on a Monday, you schedule it to be published on a Monday at 6 a.m. every single Monday. Your podcast better be there every Monday at 6 a.m. Because if you don't, and I've had this before, and I think it's only twice, I'd like to say, over the last near 8 years, has our podcast not come out. And it's been like some technical malfunction. The podcast hasn't come out. But it's been one of our listeners that has emailed in and said, what's happened?
Where's the podcast?
And you go like, shit, what's happened? Oh my God, it hasn't been published. And you're like that, oh my God.
That's an amazing sign though, that you've got good quality content where people care enough about it to go, by the way, your podcast isn't going, like, you're not getting out with a Facebook ad. Oh, hey Meta, the Facebook ad that you were trying to serve up to me to stop me scrolling didn't land. It's so I used to put out a podcast at 5 a.m. It's like intentionally like start the day strong with it. And at 5:05, if it wasn't there, you'd start to see social media comments coming through, which again is a surefire sign that you've got a good engaged audience. One final thing, and it's not just specifically about the podcast frequency, but just in terms of days of the week. Monday, like what day of the week should you launch a podcast? But the day that you launch, by the way, the day you launch should also be the day that you put the content out thereafter. So if you launch it on a Monday, like this podcast got launched a few months ago on a Monday, every single Monday there will be another episode there. Obviously, now we've started, by the way, just to give context to this, obviously we're going, don't commit to doing a podcast more than once a week. And straight off the bat, we're doing it twice a week. That's because this is not our first rodeo. We know the work it's going to take. We know the commitment it's going to take.
This is podcast 400.
This is podcast 4,000, it feels like today, especially after that big lunch. But we know that we've got to get together. We're batch recording it, exactly what we've said to people to do. We've got ourselves weeks and weeks ahead. So we can get to 2 per week. That's the other thing. If you are going to do 2 a week, my God, you better have at least 6 in the can, because if not, you can get yourself caught really short. Because, like I say, with one of the podcasts I'm involved in, someone did lose the SD cards. So we've done an entire day's worth of recording. We've done 6 episodes. That means that 3 weeks worth of content we've now not got. So last week, we had to do an emergency episode because we've got it quite structured. We had to do a different format to cover the lack of episodes because we're that hot on the consistency piece. Final thing on the day of the week that you put your podcast out. Is there a better day of the week?
I was just going to ask you that question.
Well, in my opinion, there is, because I've done a bit of research on this, because I love a bit of data and stats. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday are your best days to put out a podcast.
Exactly what I said. We've even got another good noise from there.
It's another good message.
Thank you for that good noise.
Fridays, so you get the same
switch off day, innit?
Roughly the same amount of downloads, especially, I don't even know, after the hybrid working thing. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, your downloads are relatively similar. Friday, they drop globally by 50%. They drop another 50% on Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah, and it makes sense, doesn't it? Like Fridays, and especially like you say with hybrid working, people start switching off. I deliberately don't schedule any meetings on a Friday now because people just cancel. People are switching off. People are traveling. Saturday, again, I know not everybody has kids, but that's generally a day that you're doing stuff. And then Sunday becomes like a family day again. And I think maybe towards the back end of Sunday, definitely start focusing on the week ahead and you're planning the week. So you might be looking at, podcasts and stuff like that.
That's why YouTube is so hot on a Sunday. Oh, that's also a thing to talk about, actually. You might want to look at a separate day of the week for your video going out than your audio. So we've just started doing this for the show that I'm involved in. So we put out the audio Monday and Thursday, but the video goes out Sunday and Wednesday. So the day before. So you get almost an exclusive to watch it on video.
Let's do it.
Even though I've said don't do anything, don't put your podcast out on a Sunday. Sunday nights are the best. It's the highest internet traffic surge of usage. So we put out the video on a Sunday night. Audio goes out Monday morning. Following Wednesday, the video goes out on a Wednesday night, and the Thursday morning the audio goes out.
And the last point,
it's not cannibalised the audience, which is mad.
And the last thing of the last thing of the last thing to mention is go and look at Apple or Spotify after you've consumed the last piece of content on that channel, because you will get a pop-up message that will say, if you like this,
you will like this.
And it will take you away to podcasts in your niche. And your audience has just migrated. So you want to be keeping people on that native platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, build a pipeline of content before you launch, batch record stuff, get super organized, and be super consistent. If you do one thing, even when my podcast was flatlining for 2 years because I was not promoting it, I was still keeping it alive. It was still on an oxygen tank because it was coming out on the same day at the same time every single week.
Consistency will kill a podcast if you don't take it serious.
Yeah,
that categorically will. And it's also we talk about loads here on the podcast and loads in Pod School. Those 1% gains. The easiest way to not have a 10% loss is just put the show out each week.
Yeah.
There you go. So hopefully you have found this useful and interesting podcast frequency. Again, I know that some of the episodes that we cover, sexy, exciting stuff like marketing and how to go and get a new audience and how to make money and to sponsor. But if you don't do the basic stuff right, then your podcast will not get to the levels that you want it to get to. I've been James Burtt. He's been Alex Chisnall. If you have enjoyed this, please feel free to give us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcast. You could let somebody else know in the podcasting space about this brilliant content on how to take their podcast to the next level. And you can also join Pod School absolutely free of charge. It is school.com, skool.com/Pod School. School spelt the proper way for our back end part of it, PODSCHOOL. Or you can just click the link in the show notes. You can join that community for free of charge. There are webinars, there are interviews, there are Q&As, there are documents, there are guides, there are training videos, all free of charge for you to join. Jump in, get your feet wet, and see if you love what we're doing over there. But we'll see you on the next episode of How to Start, Grow, and Monetize Your Podcast.